The Switch library is massive. We're talking hundreds of games, and picking the best ones is genuinely tough. But I did it. These are the 30 games you absolutely need to play, ranked from good to legendary. Let's get into it. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is a massive JRPG where you play as Rex, a salvager who teams up with a being called Pyra in search of a paradise called Elysium. The world is built on the backs of giant creatures called Titans, and you travel across them while unraveling a story about loss, purpose, and what it means to exist. Combat is real-time but deeply layered. You build a party of drivers and blades, and battles reward you for chaining attacks at the right moment. The more you play, the more the system opens up and starts clicking. It's a slow burn, but once it grabs you, it doesn't let go. Visually, it has charm, though the Switch 1 version ran at a soft 540p handheld with frame drops in busy areas. The story goes places that genuinely hit hard, and the soundtrack is one of the best in gaming.
Try this on the side.
Chill stroke.
Celeste is a precision platformer where you play as Madeline, a young woman climbing a mysterious mountain. On the surface, it looks simple. You run, jump, and dash. But the real depth comes from how these mechanics are layered together across hundreds of handcrafted screens. Each room is a small puzzle that demands timing, creativity, and patience. The mountain is also a metaphor for mental health, and the story deals with anxiety and self-doubt in a way that feels honest rather than preachy. It never forces the theme on you, you just feel it. Celeste runs at a locked 60 frames per second on Switch. It's naturally rock solid with no performance concerns whatsoever. There's also an assist mode for players who want a more relaxed experience, which is a great inclusion. This is one of those rare games where the gameplay and the story reinforce each other perfectly, and the final stretch of the game is among the most satisfying things you can do in gaming. Unicorn Overlord is a tactical RPG that feels like it was built for people who love classic strategy games but want something fresh. You play as Prince Elaine, who's trying to reclaim his kingdom after a betrayal. The big hook is its real-time battle system. You set up unit formations and assign tactics before combat, then watch it play out automatically. Adjusting those tactics mid-fight is where the depth lives. The world is massive and packed with towns, side quests, and characters to recruit. It's the kind of game where you can sink 60 hours into it without blinking. The game runs at a stable 60 frames per second, since it was a well-optimized title on the original hardware, and the backward compatibility mode keeps it smooth throughout. The art style is gorgeous, detailed sprites, painterly backgrounds, and some of the cleanest UI design in the genre. It's a confident, polished game from start to finish.
No harm.
This is where the Xenoblade series really started for most people. You play as Shulk, a young man wielding the Monado, a weapon that can give glimpses of the future. The world is set on two gigantic frozen titans, and the scale of it all is hard to describe, until you're standing on top of a massive creature staring out at the horizon. Combat is semi-real-time, letting you position your party and trigger abilities in a rhythm-based flow. The Definitive Edition added a new epilogue chapter and quality-of-life improvements. On Switch 2, the game received a full Nintendo Switch 2 edition, released in June 2026, targeting 4K docked and improved frame rates, though early reviews note some dips in heavier jungle and battle scenes with the 60 frames per second target. The story is ambitious and emotional, and if you push through the opening hours, it becomes one of the most rewarding narratives in RPG gaming. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening is a reimagining of the classic Game Boy game, now rebuilt with a gorgeous, toy-like art style. You play as Link, washed up on Koholint Island, trying to find a way home by awakening a mysterious sleeping creature. The dungeons are clever and compact, the overworld is tightly designed, and the whole experience feels like a charming, concentrated Zelda adventure. It's shorter than other entries, but it's packed with heart. The game already targeted 60 frames per second on Switch 1, but struggled to maintain it, with noticeable dips. On Switch 2, the extra hardware power lets it actually hit that 60 frames per second target consistently, turning what was a slightly stuttery experience into something smooth. There's also a Dungeon Maker mode that lets you build your own rooms using pieces collected throughout the game, which adds solid replay value. If you haven't played the original, this is a wonderful entry point into classic Zelda design. Fire Emblem Three Houses puts you in the role of a professor at the Officers Academy, a school where three noble houses train their students in strategy and combat. You choose one house at the start, and that choice shapes the entire story, relationships, and the war that eventually erupts. Outside of battle, you're managing classroom schedules, building bonds with students, and making choices that affect loyalty and storyline. The strategy combat is turn-based and satisfying, with a rewind mechanic that lets you undo mistakes. On Switch 1, loading times were notably slow between menus and maps. Switch 2 cuts those loading times significantly, one of the biggest quality-of-life improvements in the whole library. Each of the 4 routes tells a genuinely different story, so there's enormous replay value here. It's the kind of game that makes you care about the characters deeply before pulling the rug out from under you.
Is that all?
Kirby and the Forgotten Land is Kirby's first fully 3D adventure, and it nails the transition. You're dropped into a world of abandoned human civilization malls, stadiums, highways, now reclaimed by nature and inhabited by creatures. Kirby can inhale enemies and copy their abilities, and this game introduces Mouthful Mode, where he swallows cars, vending machines, and traffic cones to use their properties in creative ways. The level design is constantly surprising, and the game has genuine hidden depth in its challenge stages and unlockables. It runs at a smooth 60 frames per second on Switch 1, and on Switch 2, it maintains that perfectly with no concerns. The tone is lighter than most games on this list, but the final boss and some of the later chapters get surprisingly intense. It's one of the best co-op experiences on the system, too, making it a fantastic pick for playing with someone less experienced. Live Alive is a remake of a 1994 Super Famicom RPG that never made it out of Japan until now. It's structured as 7 completely separate short stories, a prehistoric tale, a Wild West duel, a sci-fi horror chapter, a kung fu saga, and more, each with its own protagonist, art style, and gameplay twist. There's no single protagonist until you've cleared the other chapters, and the game reveals its full structure. The HD 2D visual style, the same used in Octopath and Triangle Strategy, makes everything look stunning. Turn-based combat is grid-based and fast, with each story keeping things fresh. On Switch 2, it runs smoothly thanks to the solid bass performance of the original version. The sci-fi chapter in particular is a standout experience that still surprises players decades after the original release. This is a hidden gem that flew under a lot of people's radar. Triangle Strategy is a tactical RPG set in a world of competing nations fighting over salt, iron, and power. You play as Serenoa Wolfort, a young noble who gets pulled into a political conflict far bigger than he expected. The grid-based combat is deep. Height, flanking, terrain, and status effects all matter. But what sets it apart is the Scales of Conviction system, where major story choices are decided by a vote among your party members, and you can actually influence how they vote by talking to them beforehand. It respects your choices and doesn't hold your hand. The game runs at a solid performance level on Switch, and Switch 2 keeps it stable and smooth. Story routes diverge meaningfully, giving multiple playthroughs real purpose. If you're into games like Tactics Ogre or Final Fantasy Tactics, this sits right alongside them. The writing is dense and political, but that's a feature, not a bug.
That worked, huh?
I shall do what I can.
Metroid Prime Remastered takes the 2002 GameCube classic and rebuilds it from the ground up with modern visuals. You're Samus Aran, a bounty hunter exploring an alien planet alone, uncovering its history through environmental storytelling and scanning everything in sight. It's a first-person adventure focused on exploration, atmosphere, and puzzle solving rather than shooting. The feeling of isolation is intentional and powerful. The original was already considered one of the best games ever made, and this version proves why. On Switch 1, it ran at a smooth 60 frames per second at 1080p docked, 720p handheld. Switch 2's backward compatibility keeps it at that same high standard without issues. The controls have been updated with dual-stick aiming, which makes the experience feel modern without losing what made the original special. It's the kind of game that reminds you why exploration-driven design is timeless. Pikmin 4 is a real-time strategy game where you command tiny plant creature hybrids called Pikmin to solve puzzles, defeat enemies, and collect objects. You've crashed on an alien planet and need to rescue survivors while managing your troops carefully. The game introduces Ochi, a dog companion who can be ridden, upgraded, and used in creative ways. There's also a night mission system that flips the gameplay into a tower defense format. Each Pikmin type has different abilities: flying, carrying, resisting heat, and figuring out the right combination for each situation is consistently satisfying. On Switch 1, performance was mostly solid, with occasional slowdown in crowded scenes. Switch 2 runs it more consistently. It's the most accessible Pikmin game to date, with a lot of hand-holding early on, but the late game and challenge modes have serious depth. A great pick for strategy fans who want something more relaxed in tone. Metroid Dread brought the 2D Metroid formula back after nearly 2 decades and delivered one of the tightest action platformers in the genre. You play as Samus on a planet hunted by seemingly invincible robots called EMMI. Terrifying enemies that patrol set zones and require stealth or a charged counterattack to escape. The moment-to-moment movement is incredibly responsive, and the combat rewards precision and timing. The map opens up gradually as you gain new abilities, and backtracking feels rewarding rather than tedious. On Switch 1, it ran at a smooth 60 frames per second at 900p docked and 720p handheld. On Switch 2, in backward compatibility mode, it holds that 60 frames per second target solidly, and some players note slightly sharper textures. The boss fights are exceptional, some of the best in the entire Metroid series. The story closes out a major narrative arc, so there's emotional weight here beyond just the gameplay. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze is a 2D platformer where Donkey Kong and friends battle Viking-themed invaders who've frozen their island. The level design is the star. Each stage is packed with creative set pieces, background activity that interacts with the foreground, and rhythm-based sections that sync with the soundtrack. The difficulty is real. This is not a casual game. Enemy placement and hazard timing demand precision, and some later worlds are genuinely challenging. Funky mode adds a more accessible playthrough with Funky Kong, who has extra abilities. On Switch 1, it ran at a clean 60 frames per second. Switch 2 handles it just as smoothly. The visual direction is stunning for a 2D platformer. Water effects, fire, snow, all rendered beautifully. David Wise's soundtrack is a masterpiece of composition. If you want a pure, challenging, gorgeous platformer, this is the one. It was originally a Wii U title, and it finally found the audience it deserved on Switch. Dead Cells is a roguelite action game where you play as a reanimated corpse fighting through an ever-changing island prison. Every run starts fresh, but cells you collect are used between runs to permanently unlock new weapons and abilities. The combat is fast, fluid, and satisfying. You build synergies between your weapons and mutations to create a build that can carry you to the end. No two runs feel the same. The game loops on death in a way that never feels punishing because the combat itself is so enjoyable. On Switch 2, it runs at a locked 60 frames per second with no issues. It was already optimized well on Switch 1. The game has received massive content updates since launch, with new biomes, bosses, and entire story DLC packs. It's one of the best bang-for-your-buck games on the platform. If you've never played a roguelite before, this is an excellent starting point. Super Mario RPG is a remake of the 1996 SNES game developed with Square, and it brings the classic to life with fully 3D graphics while keeping the spirit of the original intact. Mario teams up with unexpected allies, including a doll named Geno and Bowser himself, to recover the 7 star pieces from Smithy, a weapon maker who shattered the Star Road. Combat is turn-based with timed button presses that can boost attacks or block damage, adding a layer of active engagement to every fight. The remake adds new mechanics, including a synergy system where party members can combo together. On Switch, when it ran at a smooth performance level, the game is full of humor and charm, and it respects what made the original so beloved while modernizing it thoughtfully. It's accessible enough for newcomers to RPGs, but nostalgic enough to delight veterans. Bayonetta 2 is a pure action game, where you play as a Umbra witch named Bayonetta, fighting through angels and demons while chasing the truth behind a friend's soul being dragged to Inferno. The combat is built around witch time, a bullet dodge mechanic that slows enemies when timed correctly. Every button combination leads to something spectacular, and mastering the system feels genuinely rewarding. The presentation is absurdly stylish. Giant hair-formed monsters, QTE boss moments that demand the screen, and a soundtrack that swings between orchestra and pop. On Switch, one Bayonetta 2 ran at 60 frames per second and held it well. On Switch 2, Bayonetta 3, also on the platform, now hits a locked 60 frames per second, and Bayonetta 2 continues to run flawlessly. It's the kind of game where the floor is fun, and the ceiling is incredibly high skill expression. If you've never touched a character action game, this is one of the best entry points available.
Almost. So close.
Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance is the expanded version of SMT5, dropping you into a post-apocalyptic Tokyo as a high school student who merges with a mysterious being called a Nahobino. The world called Da'at is a desert wasteland crawling with demons, and your job is to navigate its power struggles while deciding the fate of humanity. Combat is turn-based with a press-turn system that rewards hitting weaknesses and punishes exposing your own. Negotiating with demons to recruit them into your party is central to the experience. Vengeance adds a significant new route called the Canon of Vengeance, with new characters and story content. On Switch, one performance was inconsistent in the open world, with frame drops in dense areas. On Switch 2, the extra processing power makes the experience noticeably more stable, with smoother frame rates across Da'at. The decisions this game asks you to make about law, chaos, and freedom are genuinely thought-provoking. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is the freshest 2D Mario has felt in decades. It follows the classic formula: run, jump, stomp, but every level introduces a wonder flower that completely transforms the stage in unpredictable ways. Pipes come alive, the perspective shifts, gravity flips, enemies balloon into giants. The creativity is relentless.
There's also a badge system that adds modifiers to Mario's moveset. The game runs at a locked 60 frames per second on Switch 1, and Switch 2 keeps it perfectly smooth. Online features let you see ghost versions of other players on the map, creating a passive co-op feel. It's bright, inventive, and consistently joyful in a way that feels effortless. The final world and true final boss are excellent, rewarding players who explore thoroughly. This is the kind of game that reminds you why Nintendo has been making Mario titles for 40 years. They still find ways to surprise you.
Octopath Traveler 2 improves on the first game in nearly every way. You pick from 8 characters, each from a different corner of the world, each with their own story, playstyle, and path ability used in the overworld. The HD 2D art style looks incredible, pixel sprites layered with depth of field effects and dynamic lighting. Battles use a break and boost system where you discover enemy weaknesses, hit them enough to stagger, then unleash boosted attacks for massive damage. The new addition of day and night cycles changes which path actions are available and opens up new interactions. On Switch, it runs smoothly, and Switch 2 maintains that clean performance. The individual stories are more narratively satisfying than the first game, and the way they eventually connect gives the world real depth. The villain in at least 2 of the storylines is among the best written in recent JRPG history.
I'll cut you.
What's our plan?
Astral Chain puts you in the shoes of a police officer in a futuristic city under attack by dimensional creatures called Chimera. The Hook is your Legion, a chained entity you summon to fight alongside you. You control both your character and the Legion simultaneously, creating a 2-entity combat system where positioning, timing, and coordination all matter. Outside of combat, you're investigating crime scenes, interviewing civilians, and solving cases. The city is dense and detailed, and exploring it feels rewarding. On Switch, it ran at 30 frames per second with mostly stable performance. Switch 2 gives it a noticeable bump in stability and loading times. It's directed by Takehisa Tara under Platinum Games, and the action has that Platinum DNA: high speed, high style, deep mechanics. The story escalates into something genuinely epic. It's one of the most unique games in Nintendo's first-party library. Animal Crossing New Horizons drops you on a deserted island and lets you build it into whatever you want. You catch bugs and fish, dig up fossils, grow flowers, craft furniture, and slowly develop your island from a campsite into a thriving community. Time progresses in real time. Seasons change, holidays come and go, and the island feels alive. There's no pressure and no fail state. You just play at your own pace. On Switch 1, it ran at 30 frames per second. Switch 2 gives it faster loading times. The depth comes from designing your island, decorating your home, and the slow daily ritual of checking in. The game launched during early 2020 and became a cultural moment. It's genuinely calming in a way few games achieve. The regular updates added more content over time. Whether you play for 5 minutes a day or 5 hours, it adapts to you. And that flexibility is a big part of why it sold over 40 million copies. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door is a remake of the beloved 2004 GameCube RPG, and it shows its age in the best way. Mario goes to a harbor town called Rogueport, hunting for the crystal stars, and the story takes wild turns through a wrestling arena, a haunted mansion, a blimp, and a battle cruise ship. The paper aesthetic is used cleverly. Mario can fold into a paper airplane, roll into a tube, or be blown around by the environment.
Turn-based battles use action commands to boost attacks and build audience hype. The remake modernizes the visuals beautifully while preserving the original's writing and humor, which remains sharp and funny decades later. On Switch 2, it runs at a clean 60 frames per second. The companion characters in this game, Goombella, Koops, Vivian, are beloved for a reason. It's proof that Paper Mario, at its best, is something genuinely special, different from 3D Mario in tone and design.
Luigi's Mansion 3 puts Luigi in a haunted hotel where he has to rescue his friends floor by floor, vacuuming up ghosts with the Poltergust G00. Each floor is a self-contained themed environment, an ancient Egyptian floor, a pirate ship level, a medieval castle, and each has a boss ghost with its own puzzle-based encounter. The new Gooigi mechanic, a slimy clone of Luigi, allows for co-op and for solving puzzles that require two characters. The game runs at a locked 60 frames per second on Switch 1 and is perfectly smooth on Switch 2. The animations are incredible. Luigi's expressions and mannerisms making him one of the most endearing characters in gaming. There's a multiplayer mode called Scare Scraper that adds competitive and cooperative ghost hunting. The final boss is spectacular and worth reaching. It's an excellent showcase of how Nintendo takes a simple concept and finds genuine depth and personality in every corner of it. The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom hands you control of Zelda herself for the first time in a mainline 2D game. The central mechanic is the Echo system. You capture abilities from objects and enemies in the world, then summon copies of them to solve puzzles and fight. Want to stack beds to reach a high platform, then summon a water block to flood a passage? You can. The puzzle design is creative and surprisingly open-ended, letting you approach problems in multiple ways. The world is a remixed Hyrule, full of rifts that have swallowed familiar locations, and the story involves Zelda actively working to repair them. On Switch 2, backward compatibility gives it stable performance and slightly improved visuals over the already clean Switch 1 presentation. It's more puzzle-focused than action-heavy, which differentiates it nicely from the combat-forward 2D Zelda entries. A fresh direction for the franchise that works beautifully. Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury is one of the best multiplayer games on the system. A focused 3D platformer where up to 4 players chase Bowser across a colorful world full of creative stage concepts. Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Toad each handle differently, and the cooperative chaos is genuinely fun. The catsuit is one of the best power-ups Mario has ever gotten. Climbing walls, pouncing on enemies, diving at the flagpole. Bowser's Fury is a completely separate, open-world adventure attached to this release. Set in the lake region where a massive, shadowy Bowser periodically awakens and floods the map. It's a short but ambitious experiment. On Switch 2, both 3D World and Bowser's Fury received official upgrades. Improved resolution, frame rate, and HDR support for Bowser's Fury specifically. The Switch 2 version runs noticeably better than the original Switch release. Together, they make a package that offers 2 distinct experiences for the price of one. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the most content-rich kart racing game ever made. 96 tracks across the base game and the Booster Course Pass, covering decades of Mario Kart history, give you an enormous amount to race through. The driving feels excellent. Drifting, boosting, and item management all interact in satisfying ways. It's accessible enough that anyone can jump in, and competitive enough that skilled players find depth in every track. Online multiplayer is smooth and active. On Switch 1, it ran at 60 frames per second. On Switch 2, in backward compatibility, it maintains that perfectly. It's one of those rare games where you can set it down for months, come back, and immediately have a great time. The variety in track design, from underwater caves to clouds to city streets, keeps it fresh. It became the best-selling Switch game for a reason. Pure, uncomplicated fun, delivered with Nintendo's signature polish. Breath of the Wild redefined what open-world games could be. You wake up as Link with almost no memory, step outside, and are immediately shown the entire world. A vast Hyrule slowly recovering from a catastrophe a century old. You can go anywhere, climb anything, and approach every obstacle with physics-based creativity. Every mechanic, cooking, weapon degradation, weather, stamina, feeds into each other. The Divine Beasts, Shrines, and Korok Seeds give you structure without forcing a path. On Switch 2, with the official upgrade, it runs at 1440p docked and up to 1080p handheld, with a stable 60 frames per second throughout, a massive improvement over the original 30 frames per second with occasional dips. Higher resolution textures are included. Load times dropped from 23 seconds to around 11 seconds in tested areas. HDR support is also included. It's the most impressive example in this library of a game that became better on newer hardware. An absolute landmark title. Super Mario Odyssey is Mario at his most inventive. Set across real-world inspired kingdoms, Mario can throw his hat a sentient being named Cappy to possess enemies and objects, taking on their abilities. You can become a T-Rex, a Cheep Cheep, a Bullet Bill, a stack of Goombas, a frog. Each kingdom uses possession in unique ways tied to its theme. The movement itself is expressive and deep, with a huge skill ceiling for speedrunners and casual players alike. The Switch 2 version received an official free update with improved resolution and HDR support. It runs at a smooth 60 frames per second. Moon collecting never gets old because the game consistently rewards exploration and creativity. The final stretch of the game, including the end credits, is one of the best moments in Nintendo history. Odyssey doesn't just play well, it radiates joy. It's hard to be in a bad mood playing it. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a culmination of everything Monolith Soft built with this series. You follow 6 soldiers, 3 from each of 2 warring nations, who discover the truth about their world and unite to fight a greater threat. The story is the most emotionally resonant in the trilogy, dealing with life, death, duty, and what it means to truly live rather than just survive. Combat builds on XC2's system, with Ouroboros forms that merge 2 party members into a giant, powered-up entity. The world is enormous and dense with side quests, hero recruitment, and community restoration. On Switch 1, Xenoblade 3 had significant performance issues, especially in handheld, notable frame drops and poor resolution. On Switch 2, it's still awaiting a proper patch, but hardware-level performance improvements make it more stable than before. A full Switch 2 edition has been announced and is highly anticipated. The endgame and the conclusion of the main story are devastating in the best way.
Enemy's broken away from me. Come here! I got something for you!
Cheers, you're dead.
Uppercut! Nothing going right! Enemy's broken away from me.
The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. The sky above Hyrule is full of floating islands. The depths below the surface are a vast, dark underworld full of secrets. And the Ultra Hand ability lets you fuse objects together to build vehicles, machines, bridges, and weapons in real time. The game trusts you completely. There's almost no wrong approach to any problem. Find a gap? Build a bridge. Need to cross a lake? Construct a boat. Being attacked? Fuse a boulder to your sword. The Sages system adds NPC companions tied to story dungeons. The story itself recontextualizes Hyrule's history in surprising ways. On Switch 2, with the official upgrade, it runs at 1440p docked with 60 frames per second. Previously, it frequently dropped below 30 frames per second during complex physics scenes on the original Switch. Load times cut in half. HDR support added. Higher resolution textures included. The performance difference is transformative. This is the greatest open-world game ever made, running the way it was always meant to. "30 games, ranging from tight indie platformers to massive open-world RPGs. Whatever kind of player you are, there's something on this list for you. Drop what you're playing in the comments, and if you're sleeping on any of these, now it's the time.